Hunger was no longer a visitor in Warsaw. It was a constant presence, a silent, patient shadow that waited beside every mother's bed. By 1943, the ghetto had turned into a graveyard of sounds, the scraping of empty pots, the coughing of the sick, the cries of children who no longer had tears to shed. I used to think pain had a limit. That day, I learned it didn't. I had hidden my last piece of bread beneath the mattress, a crust as hard as stone. My sons, Janek and Mikolai, were sitting by the window, their faces pale under the smoke-filled sky. Janek was 8. He used to run in the courtyard before the walls went up, pretending to be a soldier defending Poland. Now, his knees trembled from weakness. Mikolai, only 5, didn't remember life before the walls. He thought hunger was part of being alive. That morning, I took off my wedding ring. The gold had lost its shine, but it still carried the warmth of a past life, the life of laughter, music, and the smell of coffee in the kitchen before the Germans came. I walked to the corner where an old woman traded bread for jewelry. Her fingers shook as she handed me a small, hard loaf. "This is all I have left," she said. I nodded, even though we both knew it was never enough. When I returned home, my sons looked at me with the quiet hope only the starving can have. I broke the bread into 3 pieces, pretending it was a feast. "Eat slowly," I told them. But I didn't eat. I couldn't. The taste of guilt was heavier than hunger. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery echoed. Rumors spread through the ghetto, whispers of resistance, of men preparing to fight back. The walls seemed to vibrate with fear and defiance. I held my children close, praying that war would forget our address. Then came the pounding on the door. 3 German soldiers entered, boots covered in mud, shouting words I barely understood. They overturned chairs, kicked the small stove, scattered our blankets. One of them, taller, cleaner, wearing a black glove, looked at me with a strange expression. He said something to the others, and they stopped. His eyes lingered on my hair, my hands, my children. Then he spoke in broken Polish. "You, part German?" I froze. My mother had been from Prussia. I nodded, terrified. He smiled thinly. "Then maybe you live. But only you." I didn't understand at first. He gestured toward my sons, then at me. "You live, if give them." My knees gave out. I heard Janek gasp, Mikolai crying. I shook my head, whispering no, 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 but the words dissolved in the air thick with smoke. The officer stepped closer, and I realized, in that moment, I was no longer human. I was hunger, fear, and desperation wearing the shape of a mother. And somewhere inside me, something broke forever. They gave me one night. One night to decide whether my children would live or die, or so they said. But in truth, the decision had already been made by men I'd never see, signing papers miles away while sipping coffee from porcelain cups. The officer with the black glove returned at dusk, his shadow stretching long across the floorboards. Behind him, the soldiers waited like dogs on a leash. I sat on the bed holding Janek and Mikolai. Their bodies were so light that I could feel the bones beneath their thin skin. I tried to tell them stories from before the war, about their father fishing on the Vistula River, about the snow that once meant Christmas, not death. But my voice cracked, and the words fell apart before they could reach them. The officer lit a cigarette. The smell filled the room, sharp and foreign, a reminder of power. "Tomorrow," he said in halting Polish, "transport for children. You, maybe nurse, maybe translator. Good work. You live. Understand?" I didn't answer. He stepped closer. "Sign paper. Write name." He pointed at the document on the table. Neat German words I couldn't read. My name was already typed there. When he left, the door stayed unlocked. It was as if they wanted me to think I had a choice. I looked at my sons, their faces hidden under the blanket. Janek's lips moved as he whispered a prayer. Mikolai clutched his toy button, the only thing left from his father's coat. I thought of running, of hiding, but the ghetto had no shadows left unguarded. Outside, Warsaw groaned under the weight of another night. Fires flickered beyond the wall. Somewhere, gunfire burst, and then silence returned, heavier than before. I pressed my ear to the window bars and heard the distant hum of trains, the trains that took people and never brought them back. I didn't sleep. The candle burned low, then died, leaving us in the dark. My thoughts twisted like wire. If I die, they die too. If I live, maybe I can find them later. Maybe I can save them. The word maybe became my only prayer. At dawn, the boots came again. The officer stood in the doorway, holding the same paper. He didn't speak. I picked up the pencil with trembling hands. Yannick woke up, eyes wide, confused. "Mama," he whispered. I wanted to tell him I loved him. I wanted to say it wasn't real. Instead, I signed my name. The sound of the pencil scratching the paper was louder than the bombs that shook Warsaw that morning. And when I lifted my hand, I knew I had crossed a line that no mother should ever have to find. The paper was still on the table when they came for the boys. My signature stared back at me, black and final, like a wound that would never close. I remember the officer's gloves, spotless even in that room of dust and despair. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Take the children." 2 soldiers obeyed. Yannick screamed first. Not loud, just the sound of something breaking. He held onto my skirt, his small hands pulling with a strength that came from terror. Mikolai didn't understand. He laughed at first, thinking it was a game. I begged. I don't even know what words I used, whether in Polish, in German, or in prayers that God had already stopped hearing. The officer turned away, bored. 1 soldier hit me across the face, and the world tilted. My sons were dragged through the door, leaving streaks of dirt on the floorboards. Yannick shouted my name. I lunged after him, but the butt of a rifle struck my ribs. The air left my body, and I collapsed beside the bed. Then there was silence, not the silence of peace, but of absence. It filled every corner, every breath. I don't remember how long I lay there. The sun moved across the floor, the shadows changed, and still I didn't move. My hands trembled, clawing at the air as if I could pull them back from wherever they had been taken. When night came, I found the small piece of bread we hadn't eaten. I held it close to my chest, as though it were one of them. I whispered their names until the syllables lost meaning. Outside, the ghetto roared with fire and distant gunfire, the sound of a city devouring itself. Someone knocked, not a soldier this time, but a neighbor, old Mrs. Kowalska. Her eyes were sunken, her shawl gray with soot. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "They're taking everyone tomorrow." Trains. She pressed something into my hand, a small cross carved from wood. "For when you forget who you are." I wanted to thank her, but my throat was dry. I nodded, and she disappeared into the night. I looked again at the paper. My name. Their absence. When the trucks came at dawn, I didn't resist. I walked among the others like a ghost already half gone. Someone asked me if I had children. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. Only the tremor of my hands, the same hands that had signed them away. The officer was right. I lived. But something in me had already been buried, without a grave, without a prayer, and without forgiveness. They packed us into the cattle cars before dawn, the sky still gray and empty. The soldiers shouted orders, their words slicing through the cold air like knives. I stumbled forward, pushed by the crowd, the smell of sweat and fear thick around me. Inside the wagon, there was no space to sit. Only bodies pressed against bodies, a sea of trembling souls. The door slammed shut, sealing us in darkness. Someone began to pray in Yiddish. Another cursed in Polish. A baby cried until the sound faded into silence. I pressed my hand against the wooden wall, feeling the vibration of the train as it groaned to life. The wheels screamed on the tracks, a sound I will never forget. It was the sound of being erased. Through a crack in the boards, I saw flashes of light. Flames. Smoke rising from the Warsaw ghetto. The uprising had begun. I could hear explosions, the rattle of machine guns, the desperate chorus of people who refused to die quietly. The air outside shimmered orange with fire. For a moment, I thought I saw shadows moving across the rooftops, men with pistols, Molotovs, and courage far greater than mine. Someone beside me whispered, "They're fighting." Another voice answered, "They won't win." Both were right. The fire was beautiful and terrible, like hope itself. The train kept moving east. Each jolt threw us against one another. A woman fell and didn't get up again. I tried to reach her, but there was no room to bend. I didn't even know her name. The heat grew unbearable, then cold again as night fell. Time stopped meaning anything. At some point, I closed my eyes and saw Yannick. He was standing at the edge of a platform, waving. Behind him, Mykolai held a toy train, the same one his father had carved before the war. The image was so vivid that I reached for them, and my hand struck wood. Splinters tore my skin. The illusion vanished. The stench of death crept in. People were suffocating, fainting, begging for air. A man near the door managed to break a small gap in the boards. I pressed my face against it and breathed the icy wind like salvation. Through that narrow slit, I saw the world passing, forests, fields, rivers, all indifferent. Then I saw the guard towers. Barbed wire. Smokestacks. Someone whispered the word. Majdanek. And I understood. I had escaped the fire of Warsaw only to arrive at its ashes. The train slowed, the brakes screamed, and when the doors opened, the smell of burning flesh replaced the cold. We were home, they said. But it was a home built by death. Majdanek looked nothing like a place made by human hands. The ground was black with ash, and the air itself seemed heavy with ghosts. When the doors of the train opened, the soldiers shouted, dogs barked, and the world became a blur of mud and orders. We stumbled out, blinded by the light. The wind carried the smell of burning hair and something worse, something I couldn't name then but now know too well. Death has a scent. They separated us in lines. Men, women, children. My feet sank into the wet ground as I moved forward. A guard hit an old man beside me for walking too slowly. He fell and didn't move again. No one dared to help him. The SS officer on the platform pointed left and right, his hand deciding who lived for a while and who vanished immediately. When it was my turn, he didn't even look at my face. Arbeit, he said, work. They shaved our heads, stripped our clothes, and threw gray rags at us. My hair fell in clumps, and I barely recognized my own reflection in the tin bucket of water. Numbers were shouted, arms pulled, people crying for names that dissolved in the noise. A woman next to me murmured, "At least we're not in Treblinka." I didn't answer. There was no comfort left in comparisons. At night, the barracks filled with whispers. Lice crawled under the blankets, and the floor was damp with condensation. I lay on a wooden plank, unable to sleep. My thoughts circled the same wound, the moment I signed the paper. I spoke softly to the darkness, pretending Yannick and Mykolai were beside me. "Mama's here," I whispered. "It's cold, but I'll find you soon." Sometimes, I believed they could hear me. Other times, I feared they never existed at all, that maybe my mind had created them as a defense against the emptiness. The line between memory and madness blurred more each day. The next morning, we were taken outside for roll call. The snow had turned to slush, soaking our feet. Beyond the fences, smoke rose from the crematorium, a gray column twisting into the clouds. A guard shouted something in German, and everyone stood straighter. One woman collapsed. Another was shot for trying to help her. I stared at the smoke. I imagined my sons in it, their small hands reaching through the ash. And for the first time, I envied them. Because whatever waited beyond that smoke, it could not be worse than this place that dared to call itself life. Her name was Helena. I met her in the barracks on my third night, though nights and days no longer meant much. She had once been a nurse with the Polish resistance, her hands still steady, her eyes sharp despite the filth and hunger. Around her neck, hidden under her collar, she wore a small piece of red fabric. I thought it was foolish at first, a color so bright in a place that killed color, but I would later understand it was more than cloth. It was defiance. She tended to the sick with water that wasn't clean and words that somehow were. When she saw me whispering to myself, she didn't mock or pity me. She just sat beside me, her knees touching mine, and said quietly, "You talk to your children, don't you?" I froze. My throat ached. "I did," I answered. "But they're gone." She looked straight at me, eyes reflecting the weak light of the Baroque lamp. "Maybe. Or maybe they live inside you now. Sometimes the mind hides truth to protect the soul." That night, I asked her what she meant. She told me stories about survivors from other camps, mothers who believed they'd seen their children die, only to learn later it was a lie told by guards. "The brain bends to survive," she said, "like a tree in the wind." The next day, we were assigned to clean near the crematorium. The stench clung to our skin no matter how hard we scrubbed. I saw a cart carrying small bundles, so small they could only be children. I turned away, my stomach twisting. Helena grabbed my wrist. "Don't look," she said. "If you look too long, you'll never come back." But I looked anyway. I couldn't stop. Every time the smoke rose, I imagined Yannick's small jacket, Mykolai's button from his father's coat. The guilt burned hotter than the fire itself. That evening, I asked Helena why she still wore the red scarf. She smiled faintly. "Because I want them to know I'm still me," she said. "Even if I die here, I'll die as myself." I lay awake long after she slept, staring at that small spark of red in the darkness. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I didn't know what to call it then, but later I understood. It was the beginning of remembrance, the faint, stubborn pulse of who I once was, still beating beneath the ruins. The day began like all the others, cold, gray, and without sky. The guards shouted numbers, and we lined up in rows. My body moved automatically now, like a machine built from obedience and fear. I no longer counted days. In Majdanek, time existed only between one scream and the next. That morning, a rumor spread through the barracks. A transport of children had arrived. No one spoke it aloud at first, because to speak of children here was to summon despair. But then we heard them, small voices crying in the distance, the kind that tore something ancient inside me. Helena gripped my arm, her face pale. "Don't go near," she whispered. "You'll break." But I had already broken. I slipped away during the work shift, moving between the barracks until I saw them, a line of small figures under the gray fog. Their coats were too big, their shoes missing. A guard was herding them toward the crematorium. The smoke rose thicker than usual, and the air stung with chemicals and burning. Then I saw it. A boy with a brown coat patched on the left sleeve. The same patch I had sewn on Yannick's jacket the winter before the ghetto walls went up. My knees buckled. I called his name, once, twice, again. The sound tore from me like a wound reopening. The guards shouted. One struck me with the rifles, but I didn't stop. I crawled forward, screaming, "Yannick!" until my throat filled with blood. The boy turned, startled, and for a heartbeat, I swore it was him. His eyes were the same color, his hair the same shade of wheat before the war. Then he vanished into the smoke, swallowed whole. The next thing I remember is the ground hitting my face. Blows rained down until the world dimmed. When I awoke, I was back in the barracks, my body bruised and feverish. Helena was beside me, pressing a wet cloth to my forehead. "You can't do that again," she whispered. "They'll kill you next time." I turned my face toward her and whispered, "They already did." She didn't answer. She just held my hand until the tremors passed. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the furnaces, steady, unending, almost like breathing. And I realized with horror that I was beginning to live in rhythm with it. That night, I stopped talking to my children. Not because I stopped hearing them, but because I feared the day I would start answering and find no voice left that was mine. After the beating, the fever came. It burned through me for days, dragging me between dream and delirium until I couldn't tell which was which. I saw shapes in the darkness, outlines of faces I once knew, shadows that whispered my name. At first, I thought they were ghosts of the dead, but then I began to recognize the voices. They were soft, childish, and impossibly familiar. "Mama," one of them said, "we're cold." I sat up, trembling. The barack was silent except for the moans of sleeping women. I whispered into the dark, "Yannick? Mykolai?" No answer came, only the echo of my own voice bouncing off the wooden walls. Still, I heard them again the next night, and the next, always when the guards were gone, always when the wind carried the smell of ash. Helena noticed before I told her. She was tending to a cut on my arm when I froze, listening. "You hear them again?" she asked quietly. I nodded, ashamed. "They want me to follow them." She sighed. "It's the fever. Or the guilt. It doesn't matter which. Both can kill you here." But guilt doesn't end with logic. I began to answer them. When the night fell, I whispered promises, that I would find them, that I would make it right. The other prisoners started avoiding me. They called me Madka, madwoman. I didn't blame them. The camp had too many ghosts already, it didn't need one that breathed. Once, I dreamt of the ghetto as it used to be, the bakery smell in the mornings, the bells from the church across the wall. Janek was chasing pigeons, Mikolai laughing with a piece of bread in his hand. Then a siren screamed, and the scene dissolved into fire. I woke up with Helena shaking me, her eyes wet. "You were shouting their names again," she said. "You have to stop before the guards notice." I told her I couldn't. "If I stop talking to them, they'll fade," I said. "And if they fade, I'll forget they ever existed." She didn't argue. She only touched my hand and whispered, "Then remember quietly." But quiet was impossible. The voices came from everywhere now, from the cracks in the wall, from the creak of the floorboards, from the hiss of the furnaces. I didn't know if it was madness or mercy. All I knew was that they were the only thing keeping me alive. Because as long as they spoke, I could believe I hadn't truly lost them. Not yet. The fever came back stronger the following week. I collapsed during roll call and woke up in what passed for an infirmary, a wooden shack that smelled of disinfectant and rot. My vision blurred, and every breath scraped my chest like broken glass. I thought it was the end. Maybe I even wanted it to be. But death, like mercy, was something Majdanek rarely offered when you asked for it. A man's voice spoke to me through the haze. "Don't move," he said in Polish, soft but firm. When my sight cleared, I saw him, a Jewish prisoner wearing a striped coat with a red triangle. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken, but there was something unyielding in his gaze. "I'm Dr. Weiss," he said. "You have typhus. You'll live if you stay quiet." He gave me water and a small piece of bread. I wanted to thank him, but my lips only formed one word: children. He frowned, wiping my forehead with a rag. "You've been talking about them in your sleep," he said. "2 boys. You keep saying you gave them away." Tears welled in my eyes. "Because I did," I whispered. "I signed the paper. They took them." He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "No one truly knows what they did here," he said. "Our minds, they rewrite things. Sometimes to hide the horror, sometimes to survive it." I wanted to argue, but the fever dragged me under again. In dreams, I saw Janek and Mikolai standing in the snow, their breath fogging in the air. They didn't accuse me, they only looked at me with eyes that seemed too wise for their age. Behind them, the smoke from the chimneys twisted upward like a black serpent. When I awoke, Dr. Weiss was still there, stitching a wound on another prisoner's arm. He worked without tools, without light, and somehow without despair. "Why do you help us?" I asked. "You can't save anyone here." He didn't look up. "I can't save them all," he said quietly. "But saving one life, even one, is an act of rebellion." That night, I slept without fever for the first time in weeks. I still heard the voices, but they no longer sounded like ghosts. They were gentler, as if reminding me to hold on. The doctor had called it survival. I called it forgiveness. And in that moment, both meant the same thing. The first bombs fell before dawn, a low thunder rolling across the camp. At first, we thought it was another execution, the usual sound of rifles and screams. But then the ground shook, and the guards began shouting in panic. The sky, always gray, split open with flashes of orange. Somewhere beyond the fences, the front was moving closer. The Russians were coming. The air sirens wailed. Prisoners poured out of the barracks, confused, terrified, too weak to run. Some dropped to their knees, praying. Others simply stared at the sky like it was a miracle. For a brief, impossible second, I felt something like hope, but in Majdanek, even hope was dangerous. The Germans started shouting orders. Columns were formed. Trucks roared to life. They were evacuating the camp. I saw Dr. Weiss carried away by soldiers, dragged, coughing, blood on his sleeve. He turned his head once toward me, eyes calm, resigned. Then he was gone. Helena found me amid the chaos, clutching a ragged blanket. "They're taking us east," she said. "Marches. Whoever falls stays behind." Her lips trembled, but her eyes were steady. "We have to survive this, even if it's only to tell what happened here." The guards herded us through the gates, shouting, beating those who couldn't keep up. Snow began to fall, heavy, wet flakes that melted on our shaved heads. We walked for hours, then days, though no one kept track. The world narrowed to footsteps and hunger. One night, we passed through a burned village. The sky glowed red from distant fires, and the air reeked of gunpowder and dead animals. Planes droned overhead. When the bombs fell again, the columns scattered like frightened cattle. I dove into a ditch with Helena. Dirt rained over us as explosions lit the night. When the noise stopped, the guards were gone. The survivors looked at each other, unsure whether to run or wait for death. Helena grabbed my arm. "This is it," she said. "If we stay, they'll shoot us when they regroup." I hesitated. The sound of machine guns echoed behind us, closer now. I thought of Yanek and Mikolai, of the chance that somewhere, somehow, they might still be alive. "Run," Helena whispered. So I did. We stumbled through the darkness, tripping over roots, gasping for air. The snow turned pink with reflected firelight. Behind us, Majdanek was burning, a city of smoke collapsing into itself. And as I ran, I realized, for the first time in years, the flames were not killing me. They were lighting my way out. We ran until our lungs tore open, until the sound of the bombs became a distant memory swallowed by the forest. The night was endless, the moon hidden behind clouds like a secret we weren't meant to see. Helena and I stumbled through the snow, our feet bleeding, our breath visible in short, desperate bursts. Every shadow looked like a soldier. Every rustle in the branches sounded like the click of a rifle being loaded. At some point, we found a frozen creek. We followed it, hoping it would lead us to a village, or at least away from the screams echoing behind us. My legs trembled, my vision blurred from exhaustion. Helena kept whispering, "Don't stop. If you stop, you die." Her red scarf was gone now, torn and left behind during the chaos. I missed that small mark of defiance, that bit of color that had survived where so many hadn't. By dawn, the forest turned pale with frost. We hid under the branches of a dead tree, our bodies pressed together for warmth. The silence was almost worse than the gunfire. I remember thinking that silence was how the world mourned. In the afternoon, we heard the rumble of trucks in the distance. German voices. We stayed still as shadows moved through the trees. One of them passed so close I could see the steam of his breath. My heart beat so loudly I thought it would betray us. But then they moved on, the sound fading into the horizon. That night, hunger became unbearable. We chewed on pieces of bark, drank from puddles, and prayed that the snow itself could feed us. I thought about Dr. Weiss, his calm eyes, his final look before the soldiers took him. I wondered if he had known we would make it this far. On the third day, Helena's pace slowed. Her face had turned gray, her lips cracked. "Go," she said suddenly. "You can still make it." I shook my head, but she pushed me hard. A gunshot cracked in the distance. Maybe a warning, maybe not. Then she fell. I tried to lift her, but she was bleeding from her side, a dark stain spreading fast. "Keep running," she gasped. "Tell them what they did here." I held her until her hand went limp. The wind took her last breath away, gentle as snow. I ran again, though I don't remember how. Branches tore my clothes, ice cut my skin. I didn't stop until the forest opened into a vast, empty plain. The world was silent again. And for the first time, I was truly alone. I don't remember how long I wandered before the voices found me. They shouted in Polish, harsh but human, the first human sound I'd heard in months. I fell to my knees in the snow, too weak to run or surrender. When I opened my eyes again, I was inside a barn, wrapped in a coarse blanket, the air thick with the smell of hay and smoke. A man with a rifle leaned over me. "You're safe," he said. "For now." They were part of the Armia Krajowa, the Polish resistance. A small group hiding near Lublin, living off stolen supplies and scraps. Their leader, Stefan, was a former teacher turned soldier. He had kind eyes, though they carried the same exhaustion I saw in every mirror. He asked no questions the first night. He just gave me water and half a potato, and for that, I thought him a saint. Over the following days, I learned their rhythm: silence during daylight, whispers after dark, and the constant smell of damp earth. They treated my wounds with boiled herbs and watched me like a stray animal that might bolt at any sound. One evening, when I finally spoke, my voice cracked. "Majdanek," I said. The word alone made the room fall quiet. Stefan nodded slowly. "We've heard," he murmured. "What you saw there, the world must know." I wanted to tell him everything, but the words got tangled in my throat. Instead, I spoke of Yanek and Mikolai, of the train, of the paper I had signed. He listened in silence, the firelight flickering across his tired face. When I finished, he said only, "The Germans lie about everything. Sometimes they tell mothers their children are gone, just to break them. Sometimes they take them elsewhere." "Elsewhere," I repeated. He shrugged. "To farms, to orphanages, to be raised as Germans. Not all of them die." That single sentence cracked something inside me, not pain this time, but a fragile seed of disbelief, a thread of hope I didn't dare touch. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling beams, repeating his words over and over like a prayer. The next morning, I helped them dig trenches behind the barn. My hands bled, but I didn't care. For the first time since Majdanek, I was doing something that wasn't just surviving. Before I slept, Stefan placed a small pistol beside me. "In case they come," he said. I looked at the weapon, then at him. "If they come," I answered, "I won't run this time." He smiled faintly. "Good. Then you're one of us now." We moved often, sleeping in barns, abandoned cellars, and sometimes under the open sky. Winter had begun to die, but the ground was still hard, as if refusing to believe in spring. I carried my hunger like a shadow, but something else had started to grow inside me, a question, small and stubborn, that refused to be silenced. What if Stefan was right? What if my boys were still out there somewhere? Weeks later, we reached a small village recently liberated by the partisans. The streets were quiet, the buildings half destroyed, the church missing its bell. On the wall of the parish hall, someone had nailed a board covered in photographs, faces, hundreds of them. Men, women, children. Some faded, some torn. Across the top, written in chalk, were the words, "Zaginieni, the missing." I stared at it for a long time. Each photo was a wound. Mothers holding babies. Boys in school uniforms. Girls with ribbons in their hair. I wanted to look away, but my eyes refused. Stefan came up beside me. "People come here every week," he said softly. "Some find names. Most don't." My hands trembled as I reached for a small photo near the corner. Two boys standing side by side, wearing coats almost identical to the ones I had made the winter before the war. My breath caught. These could be mine. Stefan looked closer. "Where was this taken?" "Warsaw," I whispered. "Before the uprising." He said nothing. His silence was an answer in itself, one part pity, one part possibility. I pressed the photograph to my chest, afraid that if I let go, it would vanish like smoke. For the rest of the day, I couldn't speak. The others assumed I was mourning, but inside me something fierce had awakened. That night, by the fire, Stefan found me staring into the flames. "We'll find out where that photo came from," he promised. "There's a Red Cross list in Lublin. They keep records of rescued children." I shook my head, afraid to hope. "And if it's not them?" "Then we keep looking," he said. "As long as you're breathing, you keep looking." I slept with the photo under my shirt. I dreamt of Warsaw, not of the ghetto or the flames, but of a small courtyard where my sons once played. When I woke, I was crying, but for the first time, they were tears that didn't taste of despair. They tasted like memory trying to turn back into life. The Red Cross trucks arrived 2 weeks later, bringing medicine, bandages, and a handful of people who looked like they'd seen the end of the world and kept walking anyway. One of them, a woman named Anka, told us survivors could register for medical aid in Lublin. Stefan insisted I go. "You're burning up again," he said. "And they might have information about the lists." The hospital was a former monastery, its stone halls smelling of iodine and candle wax. Rows of beds filled the chapel where prayers used to be. I was assigned to a cot near the altar, under the faded face of a saint whose eyes seemed to pity me. For the first time in months, I lay on something softer than wood. It felt wrong to rest. The doctors were volunteers, Polish, French, even a few Russians. They worked day and night, stitching wounds that would never fully heal. One of them, a Jewish psychiatrist named Dr. Adler, came each morning with a notebook. "You're the one from Majdanek," he said one day. "Do you remember your children?" I stared at the wall. "Every hour," I whispered. He nodded, writing something down. "Do you remember seeing them die?" The question punched the air from my lungs. "No," I said slowly. "But I remember signing the paper." He leaned closer. "Sometimes trauma builds false bridges," he explained. "Your mind fills the gaps with what it fears most. Memory can be mercy or punishment." I wanted to scream, to tell him that I knew what I saw, what I did. But his calm voice broke through the noise in my head. "I've met dozens like you," he said. "Mothers who swore they'd handed over their children. And some later found them alive." The words hung between us like a fragile thread. At night, I lay awake listening to the sound of rain against the roof. I thought of Stefan's promise, of the photograph still hidden inside my coat. Maybe Dr. Adler was right. Maybe my memory wasn't truth, only a scar shaped like one. When I closed my eyes, I saw Yannick's face, not in smoke or ash, but in sunlight. He was laughing, and for the first time, the image didn't fade. It terrified me, because now I had something far more dangerous than guilt. I had hope. Dr. Adler kept his promise. A week later, he brought me a stack of papers, names typed on yellowed sheets, lists of children evacuated from Warsaw before the ghetto's final liquidation. "It's incomplete," he warned, "but it's a start." I turned the pages slowly, my hands trembling. There were hundreds of names, each one like a heartbeat in a city that no longer existed. Then I saw it, Yannick Lewin. The letters blurred before my eyes. "Is it possible?" I whispered. Adler adjusted his glasses. "It means someone recorded him alive. But where he is now, that's another story." I pressed my hand to the page, afraid it would vanish if I blinked. "And Mykolai?" He shook his head. "No record. But the Red Cross is still gathering data. Don't lose faith." Those words became my new prayer. Every morning, I went to the office the Red Cross had set up inside the hospital's old sacristy. I helped copy names, trace addresses, send letters across the ruins of Europe. The war was ending, but its ghosts still delivered mail. Each letter I wrote felt like a message to the dead. Some came back unopened. Some never returned. But one afternoon, a courier arrived with a reply stamped from Krakow. It was from a woman named Elżbieta Nowak, a former nurse. Her words were shaky, but clear. 2 boys arrived on a freight train from Warsaw, late April 1943. They were handed to a Catholic family in Lodz for protection. I read it aloud to Adler, my voice breaking. 2 boys, I repeated, as if saying it could make it true. He smiled gently. "Then you must go." Stefan arranged the journey. The trains were running again, patched together like broken promises. He found me a seat beside an old woman selling candles. The countryside rolled past in shades of gray and green, the same land that had once buried me. I clutched the letter against my chest the entire trip. When we arrived in Lodz, I stepped off the train and smelled bread baking. Real bread, not the kind that came from rations or hope. I stood on the platform, dizzy with disbelief. Somewhere in that city, maybe just a few streets away, 2 boys with new names and borrowed lives were waiting. For the first time since the war began, my heart beat not out of fear, but out of possibility. Lodz was quieter than Warsaw, but silence had its own ghosts. The city wore its wounds openly, walls riddled with bullet holes, churches turned into barracks, streets half rebuilt and half buried. I followed the address from the letter, clutching it so tightly the ink smeared onto my palm. It led me to a small house at the edge of town, its roof patched with tin and its garden overgrown but alive. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone still believed in warmth. A woman answered the door, middle-aged, her apron dusted with flour. "Yes," she asked cautiously. "My name is Lydia Lewin," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm looking for 2 boys." They came from Warsaw. Their names were changed. Her eyes widened. She hesitated before opening the door wider. Inside, the house smelled of bread and soap, a smell I hadn't known since before the ghetto. She motioned for me to sit. "I'm Elżbieta Nowak," she said softly. "The nurse who wrote you." My heart pounded. "Are they here?" She nodded toward the window. "In the back garden." I turned, my breath catching. Through the glass, I saw two boys playing near a broken fence, older now, taller, dressed in patched clothes. One of them was chasing the other with a stick, laughing. That sound, laughter, hit me harder than any blow I'd ever taken. "They don't remember much," Elżbieta said. "When I found them, they had false papers and only a few words of Polish. They were frightened. I told them their mother was brave and would come one day." Tears blurred my vision. "You told them that?" She smiled faintly. "Every night." I stepped outside, my legs shaking. The sunlight hurt my eyes after so many years of darkness. The boys froze when they saw me. The older one, Janek, my Janek, frowned as if trying to remember a dream. "Mama," he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. The younger one dropped the stick and ran toward me. I fell to my knees as they reached me, their arms wrapping around my neck. Their hearts beat against mine like two small drums refusing to stop. Elżbieta watched from the doorway, wiping her eyes with her apron. "They've been waiting," she said. And as I held them, I realized I had been waiting too, not just for them, but for the part of me that had died in Majdanek to find its way home again. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The garden seemed to hold its breath, a square of stubborn earth between a broken fence and a sky scraped pale by winter's fingernails. Janek's chin trembled, as if it had forgotten how to be steady. Mikolai buried his face in my coat, inhaling like he could breathe back the years we had lost. I felt the thinness of their shoulders, the knots of old fear under their skin. I whispered their names until they sounded new again. Elżbieta stood a little apart, as witnesses do when a miracle insists on privacy. "Inside," she murmured. "It's cold." We went in, not letting go of each other, shuffling like a single creature trying to fit through a doorway made for one. The kitchen was warm, fogged by steam from a pot on the stove. Real soup. The smell almost undid me. Janek studied my face with a soldier's caution, too much for a boy of 10. "You were gone," he said, not accusing, only stating the geography of loss. "A man told us you had been taken and wouldn't come back." "I was taken," I answered. "And I came back." I touched the scar near his hairline I didn't remember, the new tooth pushing through where a baby tooth had once been. War had rearranged him, but underneath, the map was the same. Mikolai sat on my lap and pressed my hand to his cheek, as if proving I was not smoke. Elżbieta ladled soup into bowls. "Eat," she said, and my sons obeyed with the solemnity of altar boys. Between spoonfuls, they told pieces of their journey, a freight car out of Warsaw in April 1943, a night run through woods that hissed with distant gunfire, an old priest who hid them in the bell tower when patrols passed, new names written in careful ink. "We learned catechism," Janek admitted, almost apologetic. "To stay. You learned to live," I said. "That is the holiest lesson." Outside, somewhere beyond the patched roof and the brittle trees, history thundered on. In January, the Red Army had broken the German lines in the Vistula-Oder advance, tanks grinding west like iron weather. Rumors said Lodz had been freed in a single day. The front was a moving horizon now, and for once it moved in our favor. The world was changing its mind. When the bowls were empty, Janek brought out a treasure, the toy train his father had carved, its edges sanded thin by years of small hands. "We kept it," he said quietly, "for when you came." I kissed the wooden engine and felt it thrum against my lips with the pulse of everything we had refused to surrender. Then I drew them into me again, fiercer than before, as if I could stitch flesh to flesh and make absence an obsolete word. "We're not finished," I told them. "But we're together. And together is how wars end." The days that followed blurred into light and warmth. I woke each morning expecting the sound of boots, but instead there were only the birds outside and the quiet rhythm of my son's breathing. For the first time, silence meant peace. Elżbieta helped me search through old records hidden by the resistance. We found fragments of files, torn pages stamped with German seals. Among them was a note from a neighbor in Warsaw, Mrs. Kowalska, the woman who once gave me the wooden cross. Her words were short: "The children are safe. Hidden before the roundup." I read it again and again until the paper trembled. It was dated 2 days before my arrest. The truth unfolded slowly, painfully. I hadn't given them away. I had fought to keep them hidden, begged Mrs. Kowalska to take them when the soldiers came. But the torture that followed, the drugs, the interrogations, the nights without sleep, had melted that truth into poison. My mind had turned survival into guilt. I showed the note to Dr. Adler when he visited the camp survivors in Lodz. He studied it quietly, then said, "The mind protects itself in strange ways. It gave you a memory that hurt less than uncertainty." "Less?" I asked. "It destroyed me." He smiled gently. "Yes. But it also kept you alive long enough to discover the real one." That night, I sat by the fire with Janek and Mikolai, telling them stories from before the war, their father, the river, the songs we used to sing. They listened in silence, as if trying to reclaim what time had stolen. When I finished, Janek placed the wooden train in my hands. "Now you can keep it, Mama," he said. I pressed it to my heart. 4 years, I had carried death like a shadow. Now I carried proof that life had outlasted it. The truth didn't erase the past, but it gave it meaning. And meaning, I realized, was the only kind of victory left to the living. When the war ended, the silence felt heavier than the gunfire ever had. The soldiers were gone, the flags changed, but the echoes stayed, in the walls, in the air, in the pauses between words. People walked through the streets like ghosts pretending to be human again. I was one of them. We settled in a small apartment in Lodz. The windows rattled in the wind, and the pipes clanged at night, but it was a home. I washed my sons' faces each morning and sent them to school with bread in their pockets, warm, fresh bread. They learned Polish prayers, new songs, new beginnings. They laughed again. That sound became my medicine. I tried to write about the camp, about Majdanek, about the people whose names the world would forget. But every time I picked up the pen, the words turned to smoke. Some memories, I realized, were too sacred to trap on paper. Instead, I spoke to them in silence, to Helena, to Dr. Weiss, to the women whose hands I held in the dark. Their voices still came to me sometimes, not in torment, but like lullabies from another world. One evening, Janek found me staring out the window. "Do you still think about it?" he asked. "Every day," I said. "But not the same way." He nodded, as if he understood. Maybe he did. He had grown older than his years, shaped by things no child should know. Yet when he smiled, I saw the boy who once chased pigeons in the courtyard before the world fell apart. The city was rebuilding. So were we, brick by brick, breath by breath. I no longer searched for forgiveness. It had found me in the laughter of my sons, in the quiet mornings when no one screamed, in the warmth of bread cooling on the table. War had taken everything that could be taken. But it had not taken the sound of life returning. Years later, I began to write again. Not for the world, not for history, but for the voices that still lived inside me. I wrote so my sons would know who their mother had been, not the broken woman the war had made, but the one who remembered lullabies, who once believed bread could solve anything, who never truly gave up. Janek became a teacher. Mikolai loved machines, fixing anything with a pulse of electricity. They grew into men who never raised their voices, who treated silence with respect, as if they too knew how fragile peace could be. Watching them was like watching spring rise from ashes, impossible, yet inevitable. Sometimes, I still woke before dawn, the hour when trains once screamed through my dreams. I would light a candle and whisper the names of the women who didn't return, Helena, the others from the barracks, Dr. Weiss. The flame flickered, and I like to think they could see it from wherever souls go when the world has done its worst. People often spoke of forgiveness as something grand, but mine came quietly. It wasn't an act, it was a breath, a morning, a moment when the weight finally loosened. I realized I didn't need to forgive myself for surviving. Survival had been its own form of love. Now, when I walk through the garden behind our small home, the same earth that once buried bodies now feeds flowers. My son's laughter drifts through the air, and sometimes I stop just to listen, to remind myself that the world, for all its cruelty, still knows how to sound like hope. I didn't hand over my children. I found them. And in finding them, I found myself again.